Right, our next speaker is Angela Towers, a feminist and activist, a member of the stunningly successful No More Page 3 team, which since 2012, and she's also been the co-founder of Women Up, an organisation charged with running women-led events exploring the issue of womanhood in the 21st century. Angela Towers, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so this event is the media movements and Jeremy Corbyn, and I suppose that I'm here to represent a movement that we became at the No More Page 3 campaign. So to give you an idea of what we were and what we were trying to achieve, I'll tell you how it began. So it began in the mind of Lucy-Anne Holmes during the 2012 Olympics, when she bought a copy of The Sun to read about the sporting achievements of the Olympians and specifically the female Olympians. When she opened The Sun, she found that page 3 wasn't there on that day, and she thought, oh, that's fantastic, we're honouring sort of women for a different reason today. And she was dismayed to discover it on page 11. And the thing that jarred with her on that day, I think, was the fact that the page 3 image on page 11 of the woman in her pants was actually bigger than the image of Jessica Ennis, who had just won gold for her country. And seeing that sort of misrepresentation in such an obvious fashion on that day stuck with her, and she didn't let it go, and the movement grew out of there. So we're classed as a social media campaign, I think, because everything we do is online. So we were made up of a petition, a website, and the way that we would communicate with people was via Facebook and Twitter. So everything that we did was online. We were truly a grassroots movement. There was no money involved, and it was all done on the backs of volunteers in living rooms and kitchens and sometimes bedrooms across the country, was where we would do our work. One of the things that was good for us, I think, that helped us become a movement was the fact that people would lend their voice to us. So we had, women, men, young girls, young boys, everybody who, from different walks of life who wanted to support us. And I'll put that down to the fact that page 3 was an iconic image and it's sort of become embedded in our culture, and I don't think anybody could argue that it was a good thing. So we had support from all walks of society. But not only that, we were very lucky to get support from women's groups and organisations who gave us their words of support, which we put on our website. We also had cross-party support in Parliament. So again, on our website, we had a whole section dedicated to which MPs supported us. And further to that, we weren't actually looking for any legislation. So I've been in Parliament today, and it reminded me how painstaking the process is, the parliamentary process, and trying to get any sort of measure of change is really bloody difficult when you take it through Parliament. So we were unique in that we went straight to the source. Our petition was asking the person who had the power to make that change to make it, and the way that we were asking him was with collective voices. And I think that was one of the things that made us successful. Page 3 was an ideal target. The person who had the power to change it was being asked, and eventually they did change it, which is brilliant for us, and it's nice to be considered a powerful movement, which I think we were. Since we've sort of been successful, we continued our work in looking at the representation of women in the news, and particularly in the news. And every week we do a sort of roundup of sexist news articles in our press. We've always got really good material, and actually we've had some brilliant examples this week, including a full page on Theresa May's skirt in the Mail, who ran the headline, "Remember the first rule of negotiating, Theresa, try not to reveal too much." These are our newspapers. These are supposed to be the cornerstone, of society, the thing that gives us information. These are the kind of things that they're printing. As well as that, we had the Sun and the Daily Mail declared that Tory MP Lucy Fraser had a basic instinct moment during Prime Minister's questions, and they helpfully illustrated that with an upskirt shot of the MP in question. So every week we do this sort of silly roundup where we look at the most absurd stories, that are out there. We always have lots of material, and it can be quite funny. But there's this really serious side to the press and the way that it represents women. And during our campaign, the first part of the Leveson inquiry came to a close, and IPSO was created, which is the independent press regulator, and obviously what we've discovered is that IPSO doesn't have to take complaints from third parties or organisations. So whenever they do something really offensive in the press, which they often do, there's no route to redress. There's no way for anyone to complain. So, for example, recently the story of a woman who had died at the Deep Cut barracks, Cheryl her name was. It had come to light that perhaps she may have been raped before she died, and The Sun ran this story with the headline, Army Girl Locked In for Romp. They used the word romp like it was some sort of Benny Hill comedy thing that had happened. And now, of course, the woman in question, she's not with us anymore, so there's no way that she could complain about the way she'd been represented in the paper, and nobody else could complain either. And further to that, even if we did have the facility to complain, if IPSO were required to listen to our complaints as a campaign group or a charity or an organisation, there's actually nothing in the editor's code, which is what they're enforcing, to say that that's wrong. So very often other things we would find is when Reva Steenkamp was murdered, every single newspaper ran the story with pictures of her in her bikini. In 2014, The Sun ran a 4-page expose about a woman who'd been trafficked into this country and gang raped, and right in the middle of the 4 pages was the smiling page 3 girl. Now, these newspapers know what they're doing. They're creating this whole entertainment package around sex and sexual violence against women. And it's just a huge distraction technique. Page 3 actually is across from the politics pages in The Sun. You know, so it's like, this is what's going on in the country, but here's some tips for you. You know, they're very smart, they know what they're doing, and it continues to this day, this sort of distraction technique. But I suppose I want to leave you with a bit of hope and to show you that we can change things together, because I do think that we can. I do think that it's possible. It's difficult, but it's possible. So the first thing I want to show you is that The Sun's website in 2013, so very often as a campaign we would be told, why don't you concentrate on more important things like domestic violence or rape rates in the UK, etc. You know, these people obviously failed to see that all of these issues are linked, they're all part of the same thing. When you went on the Sun's website in 2013, if you searched for the word rape, you'd find 6,000 results. If you searched for the word sexual assault, you'd find 2,000, domestic violence, 800. Compare that with the amount of articles you'd find if you searched for the word boobs, which was 7,000, babe, which was 10,000, and sexy, which was 20,000. It's really difficult, you know, to take anything they say seriously when they're telling you that you should concentrate on other things. They featured 9 times more articles written about bikinis than domestic abuse. They had 961 news stories about thongs, which is almost 3 times the number of those written about childbirth. Lots of Sun journalists actually, to try and silence us, would say, why don't you concentrate on FGM? FGM had become this sort of buzzword during that period. And they kept telling us that, you know, we should focus our efforts on that, which of course we did. We lent our support to other campaigns that were focusing on FGM, but I thought it was very telling that on the Sun's website there were only 120 news stories about FGM, which is female genital mutilation for anyone who doesn't know. But there were 120 news stories about it in the Sun, which were obviously buried beneath the 7,000 articles about boobs, of course. But today I went and looked on the Sun's website, and I hadn't done this before, and it was really interesting because the rates are much more what you would want them to be, much more what you would expect them to be from a news outlet that claims to bring you the stories and information that matter to our lives. So if you look up the word rape, there's 900 articles, sexual assault, there's 400, domestic violence, 130. And if we look up the words boob, babe, and sexy, there's not more than 2,000 articles with those words in them. So I thought that was really interesting to see that even on the online content, they were adjusting things as a result of pressure that's been put on them by, various campaigns and ours, of course. Another thing that happened during our campaign was that the Daily Star's website had a sort of page 3 feature online, and very often underneath the images there would be these gruesome and violent comments from the users about the women's bodies, about what they wanted to do to the various women that were on the websites. One of our team members, who's a nurse, again a volunteer, she wrote a little blog about it, about the fact that we were often silenced and told that objectifying images of women and violence against women weren't hand in hand, that one did not foster the other. And when we brought to light some of these really incredibly violent comments, bearing in mind that these were moderated, so these were the comments that were actually allowed on the website, the next day the website disabled commenting completely. So people are no longer allowed to leave misogynist and horrifyingly violent comments underneath, this titillating imagery of women, which again I think is a really important thing, because, if we're online and we're looking at things, and especially young people, and they're seeing this violent language associated with sexual imagery, it's not a good thing. It shouldn't be allowed, and it's slowly we're changing minds about what, the correct way to sort of operate online. Which I think is really interesting. When we polled our supporters, so before I came here, we did a little poll on our supporters to try and find out if they thought anything had changed in the media since our campaign, since our win. And 17% of them said they thought the representation of women had gotten worse. 42% said they thought it was the same, and 41% said they thought it had gotten better. I think the Olympics are always a really good litmus test for how women are represented in the media, and there wasn't much difference this time round. And we had John Inverdale putting his foot in it again, like he seems to do in every sporting event, and forgetting about the existence of women in the world of tennis. So, I do think it's an interesting measure for the representation of women, certainly sport. I think that what we did achieve that was the most important thing as a campaign is that we sort of mobilised a generation of young women and young men as well, but predominantly young women, and we showed them that their voices matter, that they can change things with their words. And we do live in an amazing time. You can become an activist, in a few minutes on Twitter if you join in a conversation, or on Facebook, And so I think that we've encouraged the younger generation certainly to make their voices heard. We had a motto, and I think it was Arthur Ashe who said this: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And we also had another motto, which was go big or go home, which was really useful when we made our somewhat enthusiastic and misguided bid for Christmas #1 in 2014. But the representation of women in the media in the UK is actually symptomatic of a system that wants to repress any dissenting voices. We don't want to represent women in their full humanity, because then we'd have to represent all humans in their full humanity, and we don't want to do that. They want to sort of annihilate any idea that strays from the cultural hegemony, and the representation of women is just a symptom of that. They want to make sure that the debate stays precisely in the middle ground, and the way that they do that is using stereotypes over reality to tell stories that are far from the truth. The vilification of refugees, benefit claimants, the objectification of women, the sensationalising of violence and sexual violence against women, it's all part of this public spectacle and entertainment package that's being created to distract people from the real issues. The media coverage of female Olympians is the perfect metaphor, actually, I think. The obscenely rich and powerful elite white men who run our media don't ever want the women to run as fast as them. But we can, and this is a really important point, something that made our campaign very powerful was the words that other organisations were willing to lend to us. It legitimised us, and it meant the mainstream media couldn't ignore us. When we had quotes from Women's Aid, Rape Crisis, the Girl Guides, they could no longer silence us and tell us that as an issue it didn't matter, when all the charities and organisations in the UK tasked with looking after women and girls were saying actually it does matter. And so I think that as a movement, what we should be doing, all of these movements in the room, we should be working together and supporting each other. And that's a really, really important thing, because without that, none of us will ever get anywhere. So that's the message that I want to leave everybody with. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Angela. And that is a very important message, I think, to leave us with. And at the Media Reform Coalition, one of the things that we're constantly trying to do, and very, in a way that's very under-resourced and under-supported, is to reach out as much as possible to all sorts of organisations, beyond the usual suspects within media campaigning issues.